Hello, stream. So, first stream with glasses. I have glasses now. Oh man, it's definitely different. It's like it's pretty crazy. All right. Chapter 14. So the glasses are primarily for long distance. I'm not sure if I should wear them for reading or not. I think at first I'm going to leave them off when I read, just because they help a lot with long distance, but I don't want to become dependent on them for close-up stuff. I don't know. The optometrist said you should wear them when you're driving and out and about and everything like that. So that's what I'll leave it. I'll reserve it for that. Chapter 14. Now the steps felt hounded and traveling through the woods. Traveling through the woods should be woods. Traveling through the woods no longer gave Lauren any sense of peace. All that day she could not banish thoughts of their fight with the shades. Over and over she saw in her mind's eye the dagger held aloft, ready to plunge into the soft flesh of the woman's throat. For she had been ready to strike, that she knew. Fueled partly by her worry for Jem, whom the shade had attacked, and partly by the thrill of the fight, she had very nearly taken the woman's life. But you did not, she tried to tell herself. Yet it had been a near thing. So near, in fact, that she could almost imagine the feeling of the dagger sliding through skin. And why stop yourself, came a voice in her mind. She had been a killer before she first left the Birchwood, though she had only recently learned that fact. Along all the roads south and then west and north and east again, she had counseled peace to her companion. She had called Jordell bloodthirsty and admonished Jem and Annis when they wished violence on others. Now those words became a bitter ash in her memory, and she half wished she could take them back. More than the dagger, though, she saw Chet's sorrowful eyes. He had not moved to stop her. He had not even cried out. He had only watched, and if Lauren had struck, he would have let her. What would she have seen in his eyes, she wondered, if indeed she had killed the shade? It is a lot clearer, though. Ah, fuck it. Here we go. We're a glasses person. Hey, Haley. Getting used to new glasses. Yeah. Got my prescription a couple of days ago. Picked him up this afternoon. I guess. Yeah, all the best people do. All the best people wear glasses. They stopped as the sun set and evening came over the birchwood. Still, Lauren could not meet Chet's eyes, so she made a show of adjusting Midnight saddle. We will rest here for a time, but we should ride again once the moons rise. Another midnight ride, said Jem. They seemed romantic at first, but repetition has dampened their appeal. You may stay and sleep the night here if you wish, said Lauren, much more harshly than she had intended. Jem balked and looked away without an answer. Lauren, he meant nothing, said Annis quietly. I grow weary of his complaining. I will return in a moment. She hobbled Midnight and walked away, hoping they would think she was going to make water. In truth, she only wanted to be alone. Soon she came upon a clearing, the other end of it invisible in the dimming twilight, and sat with her back against a tree. Sightless, she stared into the darkness, her hands fiddling in her lap, trying to banish the anger and the melancholy that plagued her. You cannot lie to me, you know. Chet's words came from nowhere and frightened her half to death. She jerked to her feet. He stood by the tree she had rested against, leaning there with arms folded. Lauren shoved his shoulder hard. Do not sneak up on me like that. He gave a smile, but it was tinged with sadness. You would prefer I tramped around the forest like an ox? I thought we had sought to go with stealth. You know what I mean. Go back to the others. Leave me be. Why? What ails you? She glared. Why, nothing at all. It is only that murderers chase us through the forest, and twice they've nearly killed us. No matter what we try, we cannot evade them for long. Indeed, it is only by the greatest miracles of luck that we are alive at all. So as you can see, it is nothing. What could I possibly be worried about? Clearly, our fortune is such a blessing that we need not concern ourselves with any worldly troubles. He did not answer, but only looked back at her, and now the stars shone bright enough for her to see him. He had the same look he had worn earlier when she nearly killed the shade. Stop that, she snapped. What? You look at me with pity. I do not ask for it, I do not need it, and most importantly, I do not want it. Save it for Zane, who suffers greater than any of the rest of us. I do not pity you, though I will admit it pains me to see you suffer the way you do. I do not suffer! It came out as a shout. She drew a deep breath and spoke in a more measured tone. I do not suffer. Yes, I am worried, and if you do not understand why, you are a fool. You cannot lie to me, as I have said already. Thank you, Nicole. I'm a little nervous. It's very nice of you, though. I'm getting used to it, I guess. I don't know. It's weird. It's weird. Her teeth ground together and her words came with great effort. You think I'm lying? Very well. Tell me the truth. I saw in your face the moment when you almost killed that woman. I did not almost kill her. You cannot. I am not lying. She no longer cared how loud she was. I am not a murderer. I am not a murderer. I know it. You stayed your hand, and for that I am proud of you. I know few others. In fact, I know no one who would have shown such restraint in the heat of a fight. Her anger fled like a gust of southern wind, and like the wind it left her cold. She slumped, shoulders sagging, and sat down again. Slowly, Chet came and sat before her. She thought for a moment that he might take her hands, but he did not. Ever since I left the forest, I have told myself I was better than those who would kill without thinking, she said quietly. There are so many times when it would have been easier, but I refused, and I chastised those who I thought took lives too easily. You were not wrong, said Chet, not even now. You have been sorely tested and you faltered, but you did not fail. I only wish you did not have to take the test at all. Do you understand now? I wish you could abandon this quest not only because I fear for your life. I do not want to see your mind broken by whatever madness runs rampant in the Nine Lands. Lauren shook her head. To turn aside now would make me a coward. If we do not act, the madness you speak of would gather in strength until all things were swept away before it. Mayhap if Jordell were still alive, I could leave it in his hands, but he died. Now I feel as though right and wrong slipped through my fingers, pooling together upon the ground until I can no longer tell one from the other. All the more reason to go, said Chet. I do not believe in a darkness so great that we cannot outrun it. You do not know what I have seen. The shades are not the worst of it. These shades are not the worst of it. They are but servants of a dark power, a wizard they call the Necromancer. Who is he? I have heard nothing of it. And besides, what is one wizard in all the Nine Lands? He, if he is a man, for we do not know, is not just a wizard. He is the master of death itself. The Nine Lands will fall before him if he is not stopped, and only the mystics can resist him. Chet looked away, thinking. Then he said, Very well. You say you must tell them for the memory of your friend. I pledge my help in that. Let us give this warning, and then they may fight their war. We need take no part in it. We can return home or go to any other land you wish. Lauren met his gaze. I do not know that for certain, but if no more is required of me once I have brought these tidings, then I will go with you. Promise me that. No, she said quickly. I will not promise anything. I will promise only to try. That must be enough. The moon shone in his eyes as he studied her. Finally he nodded. It is. She sighed. Good, then let us return to the others and ride on. In all haste, he said, for the sooner we reach Feldamar, the sooner I mean to ride with you away from all this, if I must tie you to my saddle to do it. She kicked his shin, leaving him to hop painfully back through the trees to the horses. Lauren let them stop again when the moon set, and in the 3 hours of darkness before dawn they slept in restless fits. Zane stayed on watch once again, but when Lauren rose, she thought she might as well have stayed with him. She'd found it hard to get any sleep at all. Dawn came with no sign of pursuit, but still they rode north as quickly as they could. Now they had resumed their earlier caution, so whenever they reached the river, they would ride in it for a mile or more before getting back on course. Just after they stopped for a midday meal, Chet called them to a halt and pointed. Far above the trees ahead, they could see thin wisps of white smoke rising. Signs of a village, said Lauren. I thought we turned away from your home, said Jem. Not their village, you dolt, said Annis. Do you think there's only one in all this great expanse of forest? My tutors used to tell me there were hundreds, all within a day's ride of each other, but who never saw each other at all more often than not. They say that living so far from any other people, the tongues they speak can change throughout the generations, so that sometimes when they meet each other, they must talk with their hands. That is ridiculous, said Lauren. We knew of other villages within the birchwood and would meet with them on occasion. We never had to speak with our hands. Anna shrugged. Mayhap you did not go deep enough into the woods. Zane had been grinding his teeth, but now he spoke. Will you all be silent? Do we make for the village or avoid it? I say we go there, said Chet. They will be friendly, and perhaps we could pay to spend the night under a roof rather than the stars. It would be wise to replenish our supplies in any case. We lack for nothing now, but that may not always be so. The wise man keeps his larder full even in times of plenty, said Zane. Very well, lead on, huntsman. Hold, said Lauren. What if the shades come to the village after we have gone? They will learn of our course and can guess where we mean to go. What if they have reached the village already, said Jem quietly. That gave them all pause for a chilling moment. Annis looked into the trees distrustfully. I doubt very much that they reached it already, said Chet. Or if they did, they at least did not attack it, for then I think we would see darker, thicker smoke from the burning of the homes. Mayhap, said Lauren, and mayhap your other concern may be turned to advantage, said Zane. If we meet villagers, we may tell them we are heading west. The shades, if they come after, will think we are doubling back or making for some other destination. It may throw them off our trail. It might, said Lauren, or it could endanger the village terribly. If the shades believe they know something of our whereabouts, they may strike the village down in wrath. If the shades believe the villagers are hiding something, they will strike regardless, said Chet quietly. Therefore let us give information willingly and with no sign of deception so that they may pass it on freely. That may be their greatest chance of avoiding slaughter. She could not deny that, though it was a chilling thought. Very well, only let us approach the village from the east so that we lend credence to the lie. A fine plan, said Jem, licking his lips. I enjoy all that talk of wise men, but I like a full larder best. Gonna go grab another beer. Be right back. Oh, I've been muted. That's fantastic. It worked out because Meg called me. But I'm back now. And she's calling me again. Zane, stay here with the children, said Lauren. Chet, come with me. It could be dangerous, he said, still pale as a sheet. Someone could be alive. Mayhap they need help. Stay if you want, but I will not. So saying, she leapt from Midnight's saddle and pulled her bow from her back. After a moment, she heard the heavy thud of Chet's boots landing in the grass and then his soft footsteps as he came after her. That was a relief, but still the hairs on the back of her neck rose ever higher the farther she advanced. The village had become a charnel house, with bodies strewn about everywhere. As in Northwood, no one had been spared. Their blood had pooled together, and the bodies lay prone in it, like weary travelers cooling their brows in a river of red. Some had been maimed, their limbs lying close by, while others had been skewered or flayed open. But of the attackers there was no sign, nor were any of the homes cast down or burnt. Why did they leave the village standing? Whispered Chet. He walked a half-pace behind her and to the side, his staff held in his hands before him like a spear. Why should they not? Said Lauren. The Shades have no interest in this place. Likely they were searching for us, but we left them vanquished in the woods days ago. Only 4. You and I saw more than that when they came by our campfire, and I would guess that there are many, many more in the woods. Likely they have divided themselves into several parties, roving through the birchwood in search of us. A sharp cry made them both jump, but they saw no threat nor indeed any source for the voice. It sounded again. Lauren saw where it came from, and she felt the need to retch. One of the corpses was not a corpse at all, but still alive. He was a young man, probably no older than Chet. At first she thought he was standing against the wall of one of the homes. Then she saw the metal spikes and the angry red wounds in his hands. He was not standing. He had been nailed there. Get him down, she cried, running forwards. She grasped the head of one of the spikes and pulled as hard as she could. It barely budged. Chet tugged the other spike and it came out easily. The young man sagged, screaming as all his weight was put on the other hand. The spike ripped out before they could remove it, passing all the way through the flesh. Another scream tore the air. His eyes had been gouged out. The wounds were burned as though with a red-hot poker. Blood gushed from his hands, but there were no more cuts on his body, only deep burns and many, many bruises. He lay there whimpering like an animal, and Lauren nearly retched again as she saw both his legs were bent at odd angles. No more, he said. No more, I beg of you. It is all right, said Lauren, though the words came from nowhere and she knew them for a lie. They have gone. We are here to help you. Who are you? He reached for her arm. Who is that? Is that Dinah? No, Lauren struggled for the words. I'm only a passerby. No one else is here. They're all gone. He broke into sobs at that, though no tears came from his ruined sockets. Lauren whipped off her cloak and rolled it up, gingerly lifting his head to place the cloak beneath it. The boy only kept weeping. Lauren, said Chet gravely. She knew his mind without needing to hear the words. They had no healing for these wounds, nor would any healer in the 9 kingdoms. With a look to Chet to silence him, she gently put her hand over the boy's. His fingers tried to close over hers, but the pain of his mangled hand was too much, and he gave up. Who did this? She asked him, her voice soft and gentle. Lauren, repeated Chet, this time in astonishment, but he fell silent as she gave him another hard look. They were soldiers, said the boy. His voice gurgled a little in his throat. I do not know. They had weapons and armor. Their captain was a beast. Lauren felt a chill of premonition creep over her. What did he look like? Was he dark of skin? Yes, dark as the night, said the boy. He called himself Rogan. He asked us for a girl in a black cloak, and something else. Lauren's throat had gone bone dry. She swiped at the back of her sleeves across her eyes and went on in a shaking voice. What then? How did the fight begin? There was no fighting, said the boy, his sobs deepening. He gathered all of us together here. We told him we knew nothing of the girl, and he started killing us. We tried to run, but they chased us down, all but the children. She and Chet looked at each other. What did he do with the children, said Chet. He took them, said the boy. He said he was their father now. Then some tried to fight him, those whose children he tried to take, but he and his men killed them too. He killed them, and when I tried to help, The boy bit his lip and sucked in his breath, but then he broke down and began to cry again. Lauren put her hands on his shoulder, one of the few places on his body the shades had not mangled, the only comfort she could think to give him. I told him I did not know where she was, that none of us knew where she was, he said as he wept. Finally, he told me he believed me, but he did not stop. He never stopped. Eventually, his cries subsided. Lauren leaned forwards, fearing he had died, but his lips moved again, barely able to whisper now. Who are you? Lauren could not answer past the tightness of her throat. Are you the girl? She would have given anything not to have to answer him, but she could not stop herself. Yes. The one he sought? Yes. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. He turned his head away from her. A short while later, his chest shuddered in a breath, and then he lay still. Chet came to Lauren's side and put a hand on her shoulder. She threw it off and walked away. He let her go, slowly turning and going back to the others. Lauren walked out of the village on the west side to the edge of the forest, shaking as silent tears ran down her face. In fury, she stared off between the trees. She wished they were here, Rogan in the shades of all of them. Let them fight her here and now and be done with it. Who knew but that villages just like this one were being ransacked all throughout the forest? What death had she rained upon her homeland by her reckless flight into this wood? A small voice, a voice of reason that sounded very like Jordell, told her that she could not hold herself responsible for this, but the white-hot anger in her gut refused to listen. She stayed there alone until the tears passed and the sun had nearly set. Then she went back to the others, circling wide around the village so she would not have to pass through the death and blood once more. They had retreated into the trees and were sitting silently in a circle. The children were staring at the ground while Chet watched nothing at all. Even Zane had a grim look, his mouth twisted with more than its usual bitterness. We will rest here for the night, she said. The shades have come already. They will not be back, at least not for a time. We will ride on before first light. I mean to say the corpses, said Jem. We cannot bury them all, not without spending many days here. The shades will have done this in other places, said Chet. I imagine they will have. Can we not warn them, or can we not at least give the shades reason to pursue us instead of killing innocents who have never even heard our names? How do you mean to stop them, Chet, said Lauren, growing angry. We could march into their midst and offer ourselves up for sacrifice, but as long as we are outside their grasp, they will hunt for us wherever they think we might be found. So you mean to let them? We do not let them do anything, said Zane. Did we invite them into the birchwood? Did we tell them where to find this village? Did we tell them to put these people to the sword? Chet shook his head. Then there must be something we can do. There is not, said Lauren. As is too often the case, we can only flee and survive to someday deliver a greater stroke that might secure victory. Lauren thought of when she and Jordell had left the city of Wellmont under siege. Others had begged the mystic to stay, to aid in the defense of the city. He had refused, and when pressed, he had grown angry. At the time, Lauren had thought him somewhat heartless. Now at last she understood. The wrath was a mask, a bandage meant to cover the gaping wound of his guilt. Doubtless Jordell would have fought upon the very walls of Wellmont and given his life in defense of the city without a second thought. But he had known, or suspected, that a greater battle lay just over the horizon, and so he needed Zane to survive. How long must he have traveled the 9 lands with that burden, letting ill deeds go unchecked in the service of stopping a far greater evil? Lauren looked at them all, at Chet and Zane and the children, their faces turned to her, angry and hurt and expectant. I will take the first watch. Rest, all of you, even you, Zane. Tomorrow is another long ride to an uncertain end. Chapter 15, dude. Chapter 16. Yay, done chapter. The days afterwards passed like bitter months of winter, cold, reluctant, and lingering in the mind long after passing. No one spoke often, nor laughed, nor told any jokes, for the memories of the village and the forest plagued them. They slept only a few hours at a time when neither the sun nor the moons were there to guide their way. Often as they pressed on, their heads would sag against their chests for a moment, only to snap upward at a jostle in the road. Zane's condition was growing slowly worse, and though Lauren tried not to pay it too much mind, she could not ignore it entirely. Fortunately, it was not as bad as it had been in the Great Rocks. Then he had been driven to madness, half the time forgetting who and where he was, and the other half filled with a murderous rage that he sought to unleash upon Lauren and the others. This was more of a quiet wasting away, a slow breaking down of his body. Lauren often saw him wincing as he dismounted, and his skin had begun to bruise easily at even a light touch. But he spoke no word of complaint and always matched the pace Lauren set, and so she kept her thoughts on the road ahead. 5 days after they found the village slaughtered in the birchwood, they came at last out the northern side of the forest and down into the kingdom of Dorsey. Early on that day, Lauren noticed that the trees were sparser and shorter and seemed less hardy than those in the south. The ground turned from soft loam and grass to a brown and brittle dirt which kicked up much dust that took long to settle. Dorsey itself, when they reached it, was much the same. The land was not quite mountainous, but rolling and hilly as far as the eye could see, browner than it was green. What vegetation there was came in small scrubby brushes and spindly trees that sucked what water they could from the earth. To the west and to the south, Dorsey is much like Selvin, said Zane, but here it is half a desert. The land may be tilled, but not easily, and so the people are as hard and stubborn as the land upon which they feed themselves. Still, adversity has made them somewhat kinder than their western and southern brethren, who, like all fat and happy people, begin to turn their eyes outward to what more they can claim for their own. I know much of Dorson greed, said Lauren. It is what brings them to war with Selvin over and over again. Ooh, missing a quotation mark. You speak with many dramatics and little truth, said Annis, rolling her eyes. Why, I have met many merchants from Dorsey and members of the Dorsian royal family, and they were no more or less crafty than any other inhabitant of the High King's seat. Those from Selvin included. You are a gem among women, Lauren, and you seem a decent enough fellow, Chet, but you must know that not all people of your kingdom are so good and kind-hearted as you. It is no less foolish to claim great knowledge of all people when you have spent all your life upon the seat, said Zane. It could be said rather that the wealthy and the powerful are much the same from one kingdom to the next, though the people they rule may vary wildly. But this is idle philosophy, and we have little time for it. Let us press on. Now they were in open territory in a land about which Lauren knew little. Zane took to guiding them, for as he told him he had traveled Dorsey well as a young man. Do not tell me you hail from this kingdom, said Annis in surprise. It is hard to say where I hail from, said Zane, especially since my first answer would have been the seat until recently, and they will no longer claim me as their own. But as for where I was born, that is Wadeland to the east, though I left it as a young boy when my parents found I had the gift of elementalism. And how did they find that out, said Jem, leaning forwards with interest. Were you bandying about the horses one day when you accidentally set the stable boy on fire? Zane chuckled, an odd sound from him these days, and one Lauren welcomed. Nothing so crude as that, though I can hardly blame you for thinking so, since you are a commoner and know little of the practices of the wealthy. When a child of royalty nears his 6th year, he is required by law to see a representative of the Academy. Wealthy families, even those who are not royalty, such as my parents... No, he is royalty. Wealthy families, even those who are only... Wealthy families, even those who are not related to the nobility at all, or only distantly, such as my parents, pay in coin for such a representative to visit them. These representatives know how to test for the gift, and they put a child through a series of trials, meant to discover if any of the 4 branches have presented themselves in any strength. I took the trial, said Anna, sounding as if she were trying very hard not to boast. They found nothing. What do they do, I wonder, if a child shows the gift for more than one type of magic? That is impossible, said Zane. Wizards are gifted with only one, even the most powerful among us. With those words, he fixed Lauren with a look. She thought, as he must be thinking, of the life mage and the necromancer, and the 2 branches of magic that had lay hidden for centuries. How did the wizards of the Academy detect them, if they even could? She doubted if they would ever know. Oh, chapter 16 done. Chapter 17. They made camp on the wide plains of Dorsey that night. They found a crag of a hill in the midst of the flatlands and settled down to the north of it so that it might block the light of their campfire from anyone who would follow them out of the birchwood. Lauren knew there might be shades in Dorsey already, and they might be seen from the west or north. But as they had seen no sight of the pursuers for days, the warmth of the fire seemed worth the risk. Chet took the first watch. Lauren had half expected Zane to volunteer, as he so often did now, but the wizard looked weary and worn. Almost as soon as they had built a fire, he curled up in his bedroll and slept. Lauren hoped that was a hopeful sign. When he had suffered from the mage-stone sickness in the Great Rocks, he had gone through a time of great anguish and pain, followed by a bone-deep exhaustion. If he had come to that point already, it meant his recovery from now on would be less taxing. Lauren's thoughts were still much occupied with their fight against the shades in the birchwood and the village full of corpses, and she feared that sleep might well elude her. But it was a warm night for autumn, and the soft glow of the fire quickly lulled her off to a deep slumber, one without dreams or dark thoughts. She woke feeling refreshed, more so than she had in all the many miles of their journey since Northwood, and as relaxed as if she had spent a night on one of Mag's softest mattresses. Then she saw the moons in the sky above her, and realized with a start that it was still the middle of the night. She looked about in confusion. Had a noise woken her? If so, it was gone now. Only dying embers remained of their fire, and the others were all curled in their blankets. The world was silent, save a faint whisper on the air and far-off birdsong. When she lifted her head, she saw Chet sitting by a rock near the edge of the camp. His head was bent down into his chest in slumber, and her mouth twisted in annoyance. It was foolish, and she would have words with him, but in the morning. For now, she would simply take the watch and let him sleep. They were all of them weary. But when she rose, she saw the elves. There were 6 of them, standing glowing in the starlight, only a few paces away from her sleeping friends. She knew them at once from the tales she had heard all her life. Those tales were told in quiet whispers in the night, for it was said that to speak of the creatures too often was to invite their wrath. The stories always came from survivors, of which there were precious few. When humans came upon elves in the 9 lands, more often than not they did not survive to speak of it. They were all of different hues, but shared white clothing and the same raven black hair, which hung long down to the small of their backs, wafting gently with every movement. They wore no armor and carried no weapons, clad only in the white robes, the edges of which frilled and floated as though under water. Their eyes were as pale as their clothing, a thin and ghostly gossamer with no pupils or irises, so that it was hard to tell where they were looking. Except that they were looking at Lauren, and somehow in the deepest part of her soul she knew it. She was frozen, unable to move so much as a muscle. What should she do? What could she do? Her first thought was to rouse the others, to get to the horses as quickly as they could and ride for their lives. They were powerless if the elves should choose to harm them. Even Zane, were he at the height of his power, and he was far from that now. Elves could not be reasoned with. They could not be talked out of slaughter if that was their intent. Indeed, so far as Lauren knew, no one had ever spoken to elves, nor knew the words that they used. But she and her friends could not run, not now. They could never move fast enough. Even if Lauren left the others to save herself, the elves could be upon her in an instant. They would kill her and all the rest of them if that was their whim, and she could do nothing to stop it. A thought came into her mind. The dagger. It was on her belt. She never removed it even when she slept, but she immediately dismissed that furtive instinct, for it was ridiculous. Mighty knights and kings had tried to battle elves, but none ever survived. What could such a tiny knife do against them? The dagger. This time the thought came more insistent, like a shout in her mind, and with a start Lauren realized that the idea was not her own. The elves had given it to her. She studied them. They had not shifted so much as a muscle. Only their clothing and their hair moved, wafting gently as though in a breeze, though the night held no wind. They had not spoken. The words had come directly from their minds to her own. Lauren reached for her waist, desperately hoping that this was not a terrible mistake. If they thought she meant to fight them, they would kill her for certain. As quickly as she could, she drew the dagger and then flipped it about, holding it by the blade, hilt forwards. One tentative step she took towards them, then another. When she was a few paces away, she knelt and placed the dagger on the ground. Then they moved at last, or at least one of them did. It stepped away from the others and came forwards, and watching the movement of its limbs was like watching a courtly dancer. The elf was pure grace and ease, and at the same time it imparted a terrifying power. It held out a hand, its fingers curled as though around the dagger's hilt. Lauren pictured that hand circling her throat, and she quailed with fear. Then the dagger appeared as if from nowhere in the elf's hand. It had reached for the blade, or moved it with some magic. If it had reached for the blade, or moved it with some magic, Lauren had not seen it. One moment the dagger was not there, and then it was. The elf turned to the others and lifted the dagger. It flashed in the light of both moons, which were directly overhead, and Lauren thought she saw the silver glow of the elves reflected in its steel as well, and then the elves began to sing. Lauren burst into tears. Her knees failed her, and she fell to the ground in a heap. She buried her face in her hands, wailing, giving no heed to the sound of her voice or whether it might wake the others. The sound of the song was too beautiful, incomprehensible, for it was sung in no tongue she had ever heard. Soul-shattering, for Lauren felt that when it ended, its grace would break her mind and leave her wishing always to hear it again. She felt as though it were transforming her from the inside out, changing something deep within her, something beyond explanation or hope of memory. The song stopped. Lauren lay there, still a wreck, aching to hear just one more note. And then, though they had sung to the dagger in chorus, as if in reverence, the elf took the blade by the tip and dropped it in the dirt. The dagger. The thought came to her again, and this time Lauren knew it for the elf's. She struggled to hands and knees. The thought of standing seemed more than her body could bear. Slowly she crawled forward, searching the ground for the blade, but she was too far beyond the fire, and her eyes were filled with tears besides, and she could not find it. A hand gripped her shoulder, and where it touched her, she felt an incredible warmth. It was not a warmth of the body, but of the soul, and where it ran through her, it filled her with hope and courage. But the hand was uncaring, uncompromising, and it lifted her to her feet without waiting for her to act. She found herself standing before the elf, looking into its gossamer white eyes, and then she realized that the glow in those eyes was the same glow she saw in Zane whenever he reached for his magic. This is the end, she thought. The elf would kill her now, for she had moved too slowly. She only hoped it would leave the others be. The dagger, came the thought, impatient. The elf was holding it now, its hilt towards her. She found her hand wrapped around the hilt, though she had not meant to move it. The elf released the blade and then her shoulder, and the world seemed darker and more horrible than it had before she felt its touch. The stones. And now in her mind's eye she saw the mage stones, the small packet wrapped in brown cloth that rested in one of the pockets of her cloak. "What?" she said out loud. She caught a movement, just the barest twitch of a muscle in the elf's jaw. Then it seized her again. Lauren wanted to burst out in hysterical laughter at the feeling of it, the power and the joy, but the elf, uncaring, reached into her cloak and seized the packet. From the brown cloth it drew one of the stones and then broke it in half to hold before her eyes. The stones. Lauren took the stone between thumb and forefinger gingerly, and in her mind's eye she saw herself putting the stone in her mouth, crunching down upon it and swallowing the dust. Her eyes widened with fear, and she thought of Zane. "No," she stammered, "I cannot." The elf seized her throat. She felt its skin upon her own, no longer dampened by the cloth that had protected her when it took her shoulder. Her mind threatened to collapse upon itself. She saw herself, all of herself, the bone and sinew and flesh beneath the skin, and a bright white light at the center of it all. But it was all of it distorted and misshapen and turned about so that she could see every angle of it at once, and from each part Lauren saw what looked like a thin thread, a silvery wisp of something that ran off back and forth in all directions. In every direction at once, and none of them, and through time as quickly as through the many leagues they had traveled and would travel still. With the sight came knowing, and she knew that she beheld the skeins of time laid out before and behind her, and all of the many twists and turns that had led her to where she stood now. And farther beyond the place where the camp lay, she saw those threads touching others, one at a time, and then great clusters all in a group, and twisting endlessly around each other in a pattern that covered all the 9 lands. The twisted, broken thing that was Lauren's body twitched, and from its mouth croaked the words, "I cannot, I cannot." Then the elf placed the mage stone in her mouth and released her, and the world was as it had always been. Lauren swallowed hard on instinct, and she felt the half-mage stone slide down her throat unbroken. She gasped, for she felt it creeping through her. She thought it might be like a black corruption or some great sickness sliding through her veins, but it was nothing so terrible. It was a sharpening. Her mind had been a dull blade all her life, and the mage stone slid through her like a whetstone, honing its edge. With a start, she realized she could see all the world around her clearly as if it were day, except that she could see better now. She saw the pores of blades on the grass, and the threads that made up Jem's bedroll, and the hairs that clung stubbornly to Zane's thinning scalp. Although it was a poor kind of sight next to the vision of the elves, this was something her mind could comprehend, and she found it beautiful. She looked at the elves in wonder, and the glow that poured from them seemed thrice as lovely as before, but now their eyes were black like Zane's when he had cast Darkfire, and she quailed under their gaze. The Nightblade, came the thought in her mind, the one who walks with death. Then their eyes turned from her. All of them looked skyward. All of them looked skywards to where the moons continued their long path across the sky, west towards the horizon where they would finally set. As one the elves turned, though Lauren did not see their feet move, and they began to wander off into the west. Back and forth they strayed, but always westerly, and though they did not seem to hurry, they were out of sight beyond the horizon in what seemed like no time at all. When the last glow of their presence faded from sight, Lauren went suddenly weak and fell to the grass again. She still felt the glamour of their presence in her mind, but without it there to sustain her, she was exhausted. What was more, the night vision of the Magestones had faded. The world was black around her again, black save for the silver moon's light, a light she already knew would remind her for the rest of her days of the elves. At the sound of her dropping to the ground, Chet started to wake where he sat against the rock. His head jerked, his eyes blinking furiously, and then he beheld her. "Lauren," he said. He tried to rise, but he was still groggy and nearly toppled over. "I fell asleep. Sky above. Curse me." "I am sorry. I hardly thought myself tired, but then a deep weariness overcame me, as though... What is the matter?" She looked at him and only then realized that tears still trickled down her face, leaking from the corners of her eyes to leave their tracks upon her cheeks. Hastily she wiped at them with her sleeve. "Nothing," she said, "nothing. Go, sleep in earnest. I will take the watch. I have slept enough. Too much, it seems." He still looked worried, and he peered at her in the night as though trying to read her expression. "I can keep the watch for a while longer, at any rate." "No, I cannot sleep now. Rest yourself. I wish to be alone for a while." She could tell he was still worried, for he did not look away from her for quite a while, but he did not argue, only turned and went to his bedroll. Soon he was asleep like the rest, and Lauren marked that Jem's snores had resumed, loud as ever. Lauren took the other half of the Magestone the elf had fed her. She put it between her lips and bit down and then swallowed, though her stomach clenched with fear to do so. But the Magestone went down the same as last time, only now she saw nothing, and the night was dark as ever. Brow furrowing, she reached into her cloak for the Magestone packet again. But in reaching for it, her hand brushed against the dagger's hilt once more. The night sprang into stark daylight, a vision beyond vision where even the horizon seemed near. Her hand jerked back in surprise and the vision vanished. She stared at the dagger a moment. Then she took it again and could see as bright as day. Jordell had told her that the dagger held many magics, and one day he would teach them to her. He had died before he could teach her this one, but had he meant to teach it to her in the first place? Did he know the dagger held this power, or was it some secret of the elves? Or had Jordell known, but withheld it because of the Magestones? Would they act on Lauren the same way they had acted on Zane? That thought came with its own terrors, and she shoved the Magestones as deep in her pocket as she could. Then she pulled them out and stood, intending to throw them into the darkness. But at the last second she stopped. Mayhap she was wrong. Mayhap the Magestones would have no ill effects if she was not a mage. Mayhap the dagger itself protected her. She could not know, not at least for a while yet. Not at least for a while yet, and until she knew it seemed foolish to throw away such a great amount of wealth and a great amount of power. Lauren put the maidstones back in her cloak and leaned against the rock once more. She put her hand on the dagger, then removed it over and over again, watching the world turn from night to day each time. After a time, the vision faded, and she saw nothing more with the dagger in hand than she did without, but her thoughts went on wild journeys long afterwards. Recalling all she had seen when the elf touched her and the words it had put into her mind. Nightblade, the one who walks with death. Those words stayed with her the longest. 18. Lauren woke Chet an hour before dawn when the sky was just beginning to gray. He roused slowly, but when he moved to wake the others, she stopped him. Come with me, she said. I have something to tell you, and I would not tell the others. Not yet, at any rate. Come. He did as she asked, though she could see the questions in his eyes. Lauren led him up the side of the hill until they sat on a flat shelf in its northwest side. From there, they could see the camp down below and the open plains for many leagues to the north and west. All the land was empty as far as they could see, though Lauren wondered if she would see anything different if she was to eat another maidstone. But that was something she was not yet ready to test. Lauren told Chet everything that had happened as best she could remember it, for already the memory had begun to fade, a gray and hazy thing like a dream half-remembered. But all she had to do was recall the elves' black eyes when she had eaten the maidstone, since she knew with certainty that they had been real. When she first mentioned them, Chet went white as the elves' robes had been and made the sign of the plow over his heart. Lauren doubted that would have helped, for she guessed that the elves cared little for such superstitions. She did not tell him of the maidstones, for she had never told him that she still had a packet of them with her, but she told him all the rest of it and how it had felt when the elf touched her, which she said was because she had not fetched the dagger quickly enough. By the time she finished her tale, Chet was looking down at the ground between his feet in thought. Lauren waited a while, but when he still said nothing, she began to feel uncomfortable. You must promise not to tell the others, she said. He looked up in surprise. Why not? She paused, for in truth she had not thought over much about it, only she knew she did not want to tell them. I'm not certain, only it feels like something that was for me and me alone. He chuckled. Why tell me, then? I had to tell someone, she said, sighing. The memory fades even now, against my wishes. I was terrified for every moment of it, and feared that we might all of us be killed where we lay, yet at the same time it was beautiful, like something from one of Bracken's tales, and I would not be the only one to know it happened, and somehow I feel that if I were to tell them, they might not believe me. I believe you, he said quietly. I hoped you would. Come, we have rested long enough and should put as many leagues behind us as we can. They went down the hill again and woke the others, but when Lauren shook Zane awake, his gaze locked with hers. What happened to you? He said, eyes wide with wonder. What? She said, feeling a chill run down her spine. Nothing. Your eyes. Something is different about them, he said slowly. He sat up straighter and peered at her more intently. Something I feel I should recognize, but I cannot. Lauren swallowed and thought she could feel Chet's eyes on her back. Nothing, she said. Mayhap it is a symptom of the maidstone sickness. Zane stared a moment longer without answering, then he sighed and turned away. Mayhap. I am weary and feel as if I have hardly slept a wink. When she turned, Lauren saw that Chet was indeed looking at her with worry, but she smiled at him and he looked away and they readied for the day's travel. The ride went swiftly. They turned their horses due east around midday, for the land seemed flat and easy, while to the north and south it was rocky and harsh. 3 more days they rode this way, and each night Lauren went to sleep thinking of the elves, and woke to memories of their faces in the moon's light. The party gave a wide berth to any villages or farms they spied from afar. Doubtless someone would mark their passing, but they wanted to leave as little information in their wake as they could. On the 4th day, Lauren found Zane studying their saddlebags with worry. Her earlier optimism about his recovery seemed to have been justified, for he was slowly regaining his strength, but now he was looking at their supplies and seemed displeased. We do not have enough to reach the coast, said Zane. We thought we might not. That worry was far off when we were still in the birchwood. Now it presses close. I would counsel we should stop at the next village we see, only I feared that if the shades still follow us, it could freshen the trail. We have seen neither hide nor hair of them for days now, said Jem, piping up from behind Annis on their horse, and I would welcome a change from the endless unbroken brown of this kingdom and the wilting scrub brush that covers its landscape. He had taken to complaining day and night about Dorsey, never tiring of pointing out its flaws when compared to the lush green of Selvin, until Lauren had to grit her teeth to keep from cuffing him. He is right, Lauren, said Annis, and I try not to complain, but I too would welcome a stop. This road is lonely and dirty and boring. Very well, said Lauren. We shall rest in the next town we see. Mayhap we will even spend the night in an inn. It will seem poor compared to Mag, said Chet quietly. They all rode in silence for some time after that. They did not have to wait long, for later that afternoon they saw a small cluster of brown homes near the horizon. Lauren stowed her black cloak in the saddlebag, for it was far too distinctive, but despite misgivings about the wisdom of such a stop, Lauren found herself nudging a bit more speed out of midnight. The mare seemed to catch her mood. The town sat on a small stream that headed to the northeast, and likely ran all the way to the ocean many, many leagues away. The sun was nearing the horizon as they reached the place. From a ways off, they saw some folk at the town's western end, waiting, or so it seemed, but once they got close enough to be seen more clearly, the villagers turned and shuffled off back to their homes. As they left, Lauren saw weapons in their hands, staves and simple cudgels, no blades or spears. It gave her an unquiet feeling. Did anyone else find that odd? Chet said, and she knew he had seen the same thing. Again, you forget that we are in Dorsey now, said Zane. Villages and towns cannot afford to be so friendly as in Selvin, and we would not do well to mention it either, for you and your voices would mark us as foreigners. For that and your voices would mark us as foreigners. The village was a small place, but a road ran through it parallel to the river, and there was an inn at the southwestern end. They caught a few glances as they rode past the homes, but the villagers seemed filled with curiosity rather than suspicion. The inn was low and squat, only a single story high, with the rooms around the outside of the building and all their doors leading straight to the common room at the center. A fat and bearded innkeeper greeted them cordially at the door. Evening, good folk, he said. You will need rooms for the night, I imagine? We will, said Lauren, and stalls for the horses if you have the room. That we do, though you have a couple of fine steeds there. Likely they are used to finer quarters than ours. Anna smiled down at him. We value hospitality more than feather pillows, and yours seems in plentiful supply, good sir. The man grinned wide at that, and he gave Lauren a low bow. Always a kindness to have guests of such fair words under our roof. My boy Ham will take your steeds. Get yourselves inside for a pint. Get yourselves inside for a pint. Yar. They dismounted, and Lauren raised a questioning eyebrow. Anna smiled, suddenly shy. Dorsans hold hospitality as a high virtue and disdain finery, which they see as unnecessary luxury, she said. Or so I was taught upon the seat. Mayhap you should do all our talking while we were here, said Chet. He grinned wide enough to split his head open. Anna stuck her head, cheeks darkening with embarrassment. They found a table inside, and soon the innkeeper came personally to bring them supper. After they had eaten for a while and had drunk of his ale, which was fine enough, though nowhere near so good as Mag's, he asked if he might sit with them for a time, and they happily obliged. He introduced himself as Crassus, and did not ask for their names in turn, though they had prepared false ones. Crassus. Where might you be headed, if my asking is no discourtesy, I mean, he said, once he had settled down and taken a swig from his mug. Southeast for the seat, said Lauren, for they had discussed this story before they entered the town. Bridget here has a cousin in a courtly position who means to take her for a handmaid, and we are friends of her father's and promise to see her safely to her destination. I have family north and west of here, said Crassus. From where do you hail? Mayhap I know the place. It is only a tiny village, many leagues north of the King's Road and deep within Feldamar, said Lauren smoothly. Too small a place to warrant a name. Like our own village, said Crassus. Do you know the family Menet? They are my kin and are from around about those parts. Menet, said Lauren, Jem and Chet all at once. Annis's eyes widened, she pursed her lips. With a quiet look to Lauren, she urged them all to silence. I have met many Menets through my father, though it pains me to say I cannot remember their names, she said. You must forgive my friends their surprise. They are travelers, as you can plainly hear by their tone, and not from Dorsey by birth. He's not actually a pirate. I'm just being a dork. At that, Crassus gave them all sharp looks. I should say not were I a wagering man. I would lay a gold weight that you three come from Selvin. The dark fellow there has hardly said a word, so I would make no guesses to him. From Selvin stock, but born in Feldamar, said Annis, cutting off Jem, who had begun to open his mouth. Lauren kicked the boy under the table. And certainly they hold no truck with that kingdom now, what with the goings-on in Wellmont. Excuse me. Crassus eyed them a moment more, but then he shrugged and went to his mug again. That is no worry of mine. As long as the fighting stays far, far away, I care nothing for it, though you might wish to keep your words to yourselves, for some hold more tightly to their kingly bonds. More tightly, I would say, than seems reasonable. Thank you for the warning, said Lauren. Is that why we saw some men waiting for us when we rode in, bearing weapons? No, that is something else entire, said Crassus, leaning in and speaking in a hushed voice. Some say there have been elves sighted west of here. The other's eyes all widened, all but Lauren, who tried to keep her face calm. From the corner of her eye, she saw Chet looking at her. Elves, said Jem, giddy. Truly? I would rid myself of that smile if I were you, boy, said Crassus. Elves are no playthings for children such as yourself. I have heard they are beautiful, though to be certain few enough have seen them and lived to describe it, said Jem. He had done nothing to follow the innkeeper's advice, for his smile remained. Aye, and that is because they will kill you without a second thought, said Crassus. I pray they stay far, far away from here, that I do. Lauren cleared her throat and took another bite of her dinner. She had become aware that Zane, too, was looking at her now, and his brow had furrowed in thought. The conversation turned to other things, and soon Lauren rustled them from their tables to go into town and get the supplies they had come for. Food they bought, notes for the horses, and from the river they filled their water skins to bursting. All these they put in their room, ready to be packed and loaded in the morning. Night had fallen by then, and they met back in the common room for a drink before bed. Crassus joined them once more and began to tell them a story of a time the King of Dorsey himself had come through the town, tried Crassus' ale, and proclaimed it the best he had had in years. The innkeeper was a fair tale spinner, better at it than any rate than his ale was to drink, and Lauren was leaning back in her chair enjoying the story when a man poked his head in the front door and gave a sharp whistle. Some men rose from their seats and moved to the door outside. Some rose from their seats and moved to the door outside. What is that? Said Zane, eyes suddenly sharp. Another party spotted coming in, said Crassus. Probably just more travelers like yourselves, but half the boys will go and fetch their weapons, expecting elves, as though swords would help if indeed those demons decided to put our town to the torch. He went on with the story, but Lauren gave Chet a worried look. It might be more travelers, it might indeed be the elves. What if Lauren had done something wrong since they saw her last, something she could not understand? From the look in his eyes, Chet seemed to understand something of her worry. You will forgive me, Crassus, but I think I should take a stroll for the night air, she said, standing from her chair. I have had more of your fine ale than is good for my head, and I wish tomorrow's ride to be a pleasant one. Crassus looked somewhat miffed that she would miss the end of his story, but he waved them off, and she and Chet walked into the darkness. Quickly they made their way through the city streets to the west, and soon came to the edge of the town. There stood many of the villagers, more than had waited for them when they came riding in, and all of them held their weapons at the ready. Lauren felt her pulse quicken, but she could not see beyond them yet. Grabbing Chet's sleeve, she pulled him to the side, moving around the men so she could see into the west. She did not see elves, or at least not the silvery glow she had seen from them before. At first she saw only torches, like a dozen orange eyes coming at them through the darkness. When the torches neared, she finally saw the figures carrying them, and then blanched, for they were soldiers on horseback, wearing armor and clothing of blue and gray. Chapter 19. Chapter 19! Okay, we're going to read through chapter 20. And then I'm going to break. Have myself some dinner and sign off for the night. Shade, she whispered. We have to go, said Chet, and she could hear the panic in his voice. This village, the people, said Lauren, but she did not know what to do. Certainly they could not do anything from here without their horses and the others. We must tell Zane and the children. Come. Now they ran as fast as they could, feet pounding along the dirt streets, their cloaks flying behind them in the night. They nearly ran over one or two passers-by who shouted after them, but they never slowed to listen. The front door of the inn slammed into the wall as they threw it open, and everyone in the common room fell silent and turned to look at them. Riders, said Lauren, dozens of them, with arms and armor, coming from the west. She found Zane's gaze and held it, and he understood at once. He rose from the table while Crassus rose and began short... He rose from the table while Crassus stood and began shouting orders at the others in the room. Lauren and the others... He rose from the table while Crassus stood and began shouting orders at the townsfolk in the room. Lauren and the others ran to their room for their supplies, while outside the Dortian villagers mustered themselves in case there was a fight. They found us, said Jem, voice quivering. Annis took his hand. That is unlikely. If they were so close behind us, we should have seen them days ago. Likely these riders came from the south or some other direction entirely. They do not know where we are here, and will remain ignorant if we leave at once. That is our course, said Lauren. Bring your things to the horses as quickly as you can. Jem and Annis see to mine and help Zane with his as well. Mount up as quickly as you can and ride east. Chet gave her a look. You speak as if you will not be with us. I will be just behind you, said Lauren. I must find out what the Shades know, if indeed they are aware we are here already. Once I find that out, I will come running out the eastern end of the town, and you had best have midnight ready for me. That is far too dangerous, said Annis, and it is a worthless piece of information next to your life. Whether they know we are here or not, our path seems the same. Ride for the east until our horses drop. It makes all the difference, said Lauren. If they know we are here, we must learn how, or we will never evade them, and there is no time to argue this. To the horses, now. She went running from the room, but Chet was on her heels. When she turned to him, he shook his head. There's no time to argue with me either. I will come with you. I'm as sneaky as you ever were, and two are safer than one. Lauren nodded, and they went off. First, Lauren went to midnight and took her bow from the saddle, strung it and slung it on her back. Then she led Chet back the way they had come through the village. By the time they reached the west end again, the Shades had come to a halt just beyond the buildings. There were more than she had seen before, scores and scores of them. She shook in her boots as she recognized Rogan at their head. Chet joined her in cover behind the edge of a house, Lauren thanking her stars that they had not been seen. Rogan sat high in his saddle, his horse covered with thick plates of armor the same as he was. His helm left his face exposed, but chainmail hung from the back of it to cover his neck. She remembered the tattoo on the back of Triskan's neck, the tattoo that had kept him alive and which Jordell had destroyed in order to kill him, though at terrible cost. They had missed some words between the Shades and the villagers already, but now Rogan was speaking. We will not turn back. All my life I have heard fine tales of Dortian hospitality, and I will not be greeted with anything less. Or would you have me spread tales of your dishonor to the neighboring towns? We have no room for so many, said a man from the village. He was somewhat older than Lauren, though still young and hale, and he strode forwards from the rest of them as though he were their leader. If you must rest for the night, we shall not begrudge you that, only do it beyond the town's borders in the fields outside. Rogan studied him. Tall and strong the man might have been, but before Rogan he looked like a child. The Shade Captain rolled his shoulders, and when he spoke it was as though he had not heard. We're looking for someone, he said. A girl. She is young and clad in a black cloak. If you came close enough, you might remark upon her eyes, for they are a bright shade of green. Has anyone seen such a girl? There was quiet for a moment, and some of the villagers shifted on their feet. Lauren saw Crassus among them and his boy Ham standing next to him look at each other, but no one spoke any word. Come now, said Rogan. She would have passed through recently, no more than a few days ago, if she came here at all. Certainly someone would have remarked upon her passing. As I said, take your horses back out into the plains and stay the night there, said the man who had spoken before. If you wish, some of your men can come and buy supplies in the town. Rogan pursed his lips. Then, with more speed than Lauren would have guessed from his massive frame, he slid from the saddle. The townsfolk took half a step back at that. He came forwards, and Lauren saw the axe slung across his back. It was huge. The head of it was at least half again as wide as Lauren's torso, and she doubted she could wrap her hands around the haft. The villagers were backing up slowly now, but the man at their head did not falter. Instead, he took a step forwards and hefted the club in his hand. Even he must have realized how frail he looked before Rogan, but he did not turn away. Dumbass. Leave here now, he said, and his voice was strong. You are not welcome. Rogan's hand flew to the haft of his axe, and it sprang from his back in a flourish. He did not strike the man with it, but swung it into both hands and sent the butt into his chest with a thunk. The man fell to the ground, gasping, and Rogan seized the back of his collar. He dragged him up to his knees and then brought... He dragged him up to his knees and then brought the axe around again until the blade was pressed to his throat. Ha ha! That is true. I will ask again, since hospitality has failed us all. said Rogan. I look for a girl in a black cloak with green eyes. Who has seen her? The rest looked at each other, and for a moment Lauren thought they might answer, but Rogan did not wait. The axe jerked, and the man's throat spilled blood out into the dirt. Some in the crowd screamed, and they all drew back as though from a burning flame. Take the town, said Rogan. Collect the children. Chet was tugging at her arm, but Lauren stood unmoving. She felt the urge to run with him, to flee to the others and leap atop Midnight's saddle and ride off into the night. But these people would die under the swords of the Shades, and all to find her. She remembered the boy that they had found in the birchwood. Are you her? He had asked her. For he could not see Lauren through the sockets where his eyes had been. Lauren threw off Chet's arm and stepped out into the open, drawing her bow from her back. Rogan, she cried, I am here. Everything stopped at once. The villagers looked at her in fear, their faces orange in the light of their torches. But Rogan looked at her like a wolf looking at a meal, eyes glittering. Lauren of the family Nelda, he said, almost sweetly, we meet at last. I have eagerly awaited this moment. Let them be, said Lauren. Whatever your quarrel with me, they are no part of it. Whatever our quarrel, said Rogan, and then he threw back his head with a laugh. Lauren, do not feign ignorance with me. It says you think ill of my wisdom, and that is the height of bad manners. Do you think we would let you live to reveal what you know to the mystics who hold your leash? No one controls me, no one commands me, said Lauren, and you cannot win whatever you might do here. Word of your coming will already have spread through Selvin at least, and has likely already reached the mystics' ears. They will find you and crush you in your infancy before your plans ever bear fruit. All of Rogan's false courtesy vanished in an instant. He had the look of a brute then, his thick layers of muscle enshrouded in the plates of his armor, and the gore that kissed his axe was full of dark promise. But his eyes were bright and filled with the wisdom that frightened Lauren all the more. Our infancy. You think we are new to this kingdom? I drew blood before you first drew breath. I serve death itself. I am Shadeborn. My master is my father, and in his name I will lay all the 9 lands low. I think you boast overmuch. I think we are alike in that. You say you have spread word of us, but I think you lie. You have no friends in the 9 lands, Lauren. The mystics themselves hunt you to put you to death, and the constables would throw you in a dark cell if ever they laid their hands upon you. No one else will help you. We killed your companions in Northwood and your woodland kin in the birchwood. We even found the village where you were whelped and raised and put it to the torch. No, cried Chet. He rushed forwards as though he would charge Rogan, alone and unaided, but Lauren seized him and held him, and then when he struggled, she twisted his arm back until he winced. He baits you, she hissed. Leave it be. He is probably lying. You saw what he did to that village, said Chet. His voice sounded as though it might break. She knew he was thinking of his father, who had remained behind when Chet had left. Your companion shows more spirit than you do, said Rogan, a promising protege. Sadly, he is too old for my purposes, but there are many others here who will serve the master well. Take them. I will deal with the girl. The Shades at his back moved at last, jumping from their horses and charging at the villagers. The townsfolk raised their weapons, but as in Northwood, they were a rabble facing trained soldiers, and they were cut down. Lauren saw them hack apart men and women both until the ones left standing turned to flee. But they did not kill the children. Her heart stopped as she saw them pause, lower their blades, and seize any child they saw by the arm. Then they threw them over their shoulders and began to carry them back to the horses. One of them took Ham, the innkeeper Crassus's son. The boy screamed with tears pouring down his cheeks as a shade carried him away. Lauren, cried Chet. She saw that she had stood frozen too long. Rogan was almost upon them. Instinct took over, and she snatched an arrow from the quiver at her hip the way that Albert had taught her. She drew and fired, aiming low, and by good fortune the shaft buried itself in the joint between his thigh and his hip. Rogan sank to one knee with a grunt, but soon fought his way back up, snapping the arrow off where the fletching stuck out. Run, she cried, and then turned to follow her own command. They vanished between the buildings and the village, Rogan limping after them. Fly, little girl, came his booming voice through the night. Fly and leave these innocents to die in your place. The bodies at your feet will stack higher and higher until they wall you in, and there is no place left to flee from us. She had hoped the Shades would come after them, but she should have known it was a futile wish. They stayed behind and cut down everyone before them, even those who did not fight. Panicked glances over her shoulder showed her more children being carried off, slung over the Shades' shoulders. Panicked glances behind her. Panic glances behind her showed her more children being carried off, slung over the Shade's shoulders, or simply dragged screaming by their scrawny limbs. Just beyond the village's eastern edge, they found the others waiting for them, eyes wide with fright and horses ready to run. Together, Lauren and Chet climbed into their saddles. For one brief moment, they stopped to look back. Some of the buildings were burning, burning in a bright red blaze that spread from roof to roof. The air was filled with the screams of men and women, and the screams of silence with sharp violence, and the screams of children which lingered on until they faded into the dark. What happened? Said Jem. He sounded as though he might start crying at any moment. I cannot say it, said Lauren. If you value our friendship, never ask me again. Turn now and ride. They did, while the nameless village died at their backs. Dun, dun, dun! One more chapter for tonight. Chapter 20, they pushed their horses near to breaking, though they saw no sign of the Shade's pursuit. The burning town was a memory behind them before long, but Lauren thought she could feel the heat of the flames all the rest of the night. That night. Dawn came bleak and hopeless, and after a brief pause to survey the horizon behind them, she let them dismount to eat. I do not understand, she said, pacing while the others sat. I do not understand. He barely even chased us. Why stay to kill those villagers? He is a cruel man, said Jem. Cruelty does not always need a reason. He is not some simpleton, said Lauren. I have seen savagery so strong it is almost madness. We all have. Rogan is different. He is cunning and wise. He does not kill just for the joy of it, but for some greater purpose. Tristan loved his cruelty well enough, said Zane. He rubbed at his throat as though at a phantom pain. The brute Tristan had given him many dark memories when they fought in the Great Rocks. Rogan is not Tristan, said Lauren. He is something worse. If that is true, then all the more reason he would stay to kill those who cannot defend themselves, said Annis. She was looking up at Lauren with concern and with empathy, neither one of which Lauren was glad to see. She was not some child who needed consoling. I think you look for reason in madness, said Zane. Those touched by a berserker's fury do not act the way reasonable folk do. You cannot hope to control them as you normally would. Chet's head jerked up. What would you do then, wizard? Put them down? We are not killers. He spoke harshly, surprising even Lauren. Zane glowered at him without answer. Chet stared a moment longer and then returned to his meal. They downed their hasty breakfast and rode on. That day was no hotter than the last, yet the sunlight seemed harsher, and the wind of their riding seemed to bite at Lauren's skin. She was likely imagining it. The village and Crassus and Ham were only the latest fuel thrown on the fire of her guilt that had been building since Wellmont. It made her irritable, and that made her cross with the others. When they stopped to relieve themselves or water the horses, she did her best to avoid them. Soon they took her hint and rarely spoke unless it was absolutely necessary. By evening, the children were nearly dead in their saddle, and Zane was slumped across his horse's neck. Though she felt she could ride for days if she must, Lauren realized she could not force them on forever. She found a high rise in the ground and led them there, where they could rest while keeping a watch on the land all around them. The others threw themselves into sleep at once, and Lauren stood watch all night. As the moons made their way across the sky, she kept her eyes upon the plains, for when she looked at the campfire, she saw the burning of the village. 3 more days passed without incident. Whenever they saw signs of other people, Lauren went to great pains to avoid them. The others followed without question or comment, though Lauren sometimes took them many miles out of their way and slowed their progress considerably. But she would not endanger any of their lives, not if there was a way she could possibly avoid it. And then, in the middle of the 4th day, they crested a rise and came at last to view the sea. In truth, it was only the great bay and not the wide ocean itself, but the bay stretched for leagues and leagues beyond counting, wider than some of the 9 kingdoms were long, and so it seemed as vast as the ocean to Lauren. Indeed, it took her breath away when she first saw it, the sun cascading off its breadth and glowing like 1,000 precious jewels. For just a moment she forgot the dark thoughts that had plagued her for the last many days. The Great Bay, said Zane. He straightened into saddle, and his voice took on a new strength. Where men first came to Underrealm from the northern lands which are forgotten. Many long months has it been since I last glimpsed its blue expanse. Fucking god damn it. Where the first High King, Roth, first came to the Underrealm from the northern lands, which are forgotten. Many long months has it been since I glimpsed its blue expanse, and I never thought the day would come when I would miss it. The Great Bay, said Zane. He straightened in his saddle and his voice took on a new strength. Where the first High King, Roth, first came to the Underrealm from the northern lands, which are forgotten. Many long months has it been since I last glimpsed its blue expanse, and I never thought the day would come when I would miss it. Yet while my heart sings to see it, my mind is less convinced. We may be in more danger now than before. I think I feel the same, said Annis in a small voice. The world has been emptier without the sound of the sea, but now I can only think of how close we are to my family. And to the academy, said Zane. My face would be most unwelcome there. Where do we go now, said Jem. We must find a port, said Zane. There are many along the coast, although we will not be able to see them until they are much closer. There we will find passage on a ship to Dulmoon and then ride to Feldemar. Should we turn north or south, said Lauren. Neither, said Zane. Our best choice is to make straight for the coast. It will be faster to ride the road that snakes all along the Great Bay than it would be to turn our path now. So they rode on, their horses' hooves devouring the miles, but the bay was farther away than it looked, thanks to its great size, and by the time the sun set, they had not even closed half the distance. The next day they rode as quickly as they could, eager to reach the water now, but the coast hardly seemed to draw nearer. Instead, the massive blue stretch of water only took more and more of the horizon. How large is it, said Jem. Larger than you could imagine, said Zane. Large enough that you cannot see either side standing on a boat in its center. From the middle it would take 2 days of hard sailing to find a coast, and it is only a fraction of the size of the great sea beyond. But at long last they could see the coastline approaching, and by that evening they had reached it. Then Lauren saw the black and rocky sand of its beaches where waves came crashing with thunderous roars. She sat there in her saddle for a moment watching, wondering that there could be so much water in the world. Come, let us water the horses, said Chet. No, said Zane sharply. Do not let them drink from it, nor should you do so. The waters of the ocean are filled with salt, and though they hold no poison, they can have much the same effect. If you tried to drink your fill, your thirst would only grow, and you would retch and spill anything in your stomach. It is all too easy to die of thirst upon the sea, though you are surrounded by all the water you could imagine. Chet drew back, giving the waves a distrustful look, but Jem sat up in his saddle and said, Is it safe for swimming? Zane looked at him perplexed. Yes, if you remember not to swallow the water. With a whoop, Jem leapt to the ground and ran off, throwing off his belt, breeches, and tunics, his lack of small clothes, thus rendering him stark naked. He flung himself into the water with a scream, thrashing about in the waves. Annis looked away and lifted her chin demurely. At least he will come out cleaner than he normally is, she said. Lauren bid them to rest and eat. She drank from her water skin. It was strange having to resist the urge to fill it, but she had no wish to taste the water and test Zane's claim. Before long, Jem came running back out of the waters, hugging his arms about himself, and scooped up his clothes. It is cold, he said. Colder than I thought it would be, anyway. Does the ocean think it is winter? It cares little for our season, said Zane. A great current sweeps through the bay, up from the south and around, and then back out to the north, and it brings the ice with it. Jem, for pity's sake, clothe yourself, said Annis. Lauren found herself smiling and shook her head. The merchant's daughter had always had such strict ideas about decency ever since Lauren had first met her. It seemed that was one thing, at least, that had not changed in the long months since. Jem shrugged and began to pull on his clothes again. You were right about the salt. I got a little in my mouth by accident, and it nearly made me retch. I had never heard this of the ocean. Urchins of the city street would have little cause to know it, said Zane. Lauren looked at Chet to see him smiling at her, and she gave him a little smile back, but then his face froze, his eyes focused over her shoulder, and he hunched forward. She looked behind her. Chet, what is it? I saw something moving, a man, I think. At once she reached for a bow and Chet for his staff. Zane got to his feet, though it was a slow and painful process. That dune, said Chet, pointing towards the southern side. Remain here, said Lauren to the children. Chet and I will look to see what it was. Do as Zane tells you. She tossed her head, and together they ran west. Lauren took them in a wide circle so that they came to the dune from the northern side. In a few minutes they had reached it, and they slowed as one. Forwards they crept an inch at a time, silencing their footsteps with long practice. Lauren found the going difficult, for the sand shifted beneath her feet and left her stance uncertain. But the sound of the waves helped to mask the noise. They crept around the edge of the dune with deliberate, slow steps until Lauren saw it, a figure in gray and blue. She froze, ducking back, but she had not been seen. It was a man similar to Zane in age and appearance, with long, dark hair that went to his shoulders. The beginnings of a beard dusted his chin, but it looked to be there from neglect rather than by design. Lauren met Chet's gaze and made 2 quick motions with her hands. Then she went left, staying behind the thin, scrubby brushes that clung to the coastline, until the man was between her and the dune. Meanwhile, Chet climbed up the sandy slope until he stood above the shade. The man was looking out, away south and west where Zane and the children were, though they had hidden themselves. He leaned forward, straining to find them again, when Lauren sprang forwards with a cry. The shade wheeled, grasping for the sword at his belt, but then Chet attacked, his staff cracking down on the man's shoulder. The shade fell in a heap, and when he saw Lauren standing above him with an arrow drawn, he did not try to rise again. Mercy, he cried. Mercy, I surrender. Fetch the others, said Lauren, her voice like steel. She had heard cries of mercy from the Dorson villagers as the shade slaughtered them, and found her heart unmoved by the man's pleas. Soon Chet returned with Zane and the children. The wizard came at once to stand over the shade. Lauren kept her arrow trained on him, though she relaxed the draw to half. Where are your companions? Said Zane. I have no companions. At once Zane knelt, wrapping his hand around the man's arms. Flames sprang to white-hot life, and Lauren heard the sizzling of skin. The man screamed, and Zane's other hand appeared a knife, and this he pressed to the man's throat. Where are they? Zane, said Chet, a warning sound in his voice, but Lauren met his eyes and shook her head. I lost him, said the shade, gritting his teeth as he spoke. A storm struck the coast, and its thunder made my horse bolt. By the time I got control, I could not find them. Where are you bound, and for what purpose? North, to find them again. And us? The man did not answer. Flames sprang forth again. Lauren saw the sweat that beaded on Zane's face and knew it did not come from the heat of the fire. This must be taking a terrible toll on his strength, but the shade screamed again, and this time he had an answer. We were searching for you, he cried. We sought a girl with green eyes and a wizard, as well as 2 children. When I spotted you from afar, I saw that you matched the description. What were you to do when you found us? Said Zane. The flames in his hand died, but Lauren could still smell the cooked flesh and burnt cloth beneath. Stop that, said Chet. Chet, take the children away from here, said Lauren. What? He said, looking at her in disbelief. Take them away, she said, quickly. He looked a second longer, and for a moment Lauren thought he would refuse, but then he ushered the children away. He returned a moment later while the shade was still answering Zane's question. We were not to engage you in battle. If we saw you, we were to send 2 messengers at once. One west to find our captain, and another south to the seat. The seat, said Zane. Who's your master there? I do not know, said the shade at once. When he saw the baleful look in Zane's eyes, arm flinched, and he screamed, I do not know, I swear it. Our sergeant knew, but she never told me. Only if the messengers were to be sent would she give them the name. Lauren thought it sounded like the truth, and just the sort of wise cunning she would have expected from Rogan. Zane studied the man for a moment, and it seemed he thought the same. I believe you, he said. Then he plunged his dagger into the man's neck. No, cried Chet, rushing forwards. Lauren stepped into his path and stopped him with her hands on his chest. It is done, she murmured. You can do nothing. He surrendered. That was murder. Zane looked up at them, eyes dark. Mayhap it was justice. Well, this was a year and a half ago. Mayhap, or mayhap it was justice. Have you forgotten the screams of the village we left behind? I have not. Even now, the man's fingers grasped at his own throat, trying to close the gaping hole there. Dark red seeped between his fingers, staining the already dark sand beneath him. Lauren wanted to look away, but could not move her eyes. She wanted to join Chet in admonishing Zane, but felt she had no place. What words had the elves placed in her mind? The Nightblade, the one who walks with death. She thought they had meant she carried a doom with her, but perhaps they had meant Zane. I have forgotten nothing, wizard, said Chet, but your sort of justice is the kind that brings war and death to all the Nine Lands in the end. He looked at Lauren, eyes filled with fury, urging her to join him. He had no choice, said Lauren. We could not have let the shade go south to tell his compatriots where we were. She hated the look on his face then, the shock, the disappointment. Most of all, she hated the sadness and the sorrow. Lauren was almost as surprised as Chet was to hear the words coming from her lips. Had she not once spoken just as Chet had? Did she not believe as Chet did? She knew she had once, but she was no longer so certain. We had best move on, she said, turning away from them. Let us go back to the horses, quickly, for the night will not be long in coming. Ha coming. All right. That's it for me for now. This is going to take some getting used to. Oh, man. All right, we got halfway through Shadeborn. Should be able to finish that tomorrow. And then 2 days for Alchemist Touch. Oh, God. I'll probably read Weremage in the same time, silently. And then while I'm reading Alchemist Touch, I'll probably read Mind Mage. Then I'll do a silent read of Fire Mage when that book... No, well, that cover's going to happen. Oh, God, we're so close. So close. Probably going to work on Yaren on Wednesday. Crazy. Looking forward to it. Should be a blast. Brand new book coming soon. Oh, boy, I might go take a nap. No, I might go have dinner and then take a nap. Yes. Dinner. Okay. All right, y'all. Haley, thanks so much for hanging out. Nicole as well. I will be back another time to work on another book. Thank you for watching. Catch you then. Bye.